Thank you all for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, even though remotely, and I hope not much will be lost in digital translation. This notion of the digital and vernacular posed some problem to me before I tried to wrap my head around it. In a way, digital vernacular is a compelling oxymoron that brings two seemingly opposite fantasies of contemporary architecture. On the one hand, the process and the return of the real, the positivist and the nostalgic, the seemingly scientific and the grassroots, the generic and the ultra-specific, or even the speed of information on the one hand and the slow transformation of type in the other. And in a strange way, both the digital and the vernacular try to evacuate the very notion of authorship, which is at the heart of what we do. It shows how ashamed we are of the architectural traces that our current civilization is producing and leaving. Both the digital and the vernacular erase the notion of project and its author within it. It replaces process with types. And in my view, the conversation we're trying to have is a stenography of our current reality. It's an unprecedented reduction of the scope of the architects, as well as a shrinkage of its responsibilities. Architects are struggling to find their function in the production of realities. It's not so much architecture that is disappearing, it's really the architect. And in a way, architecture is far from being in danger. And in my view, it has become very much dangerous. So the question I'm posing is, in reality, isn't the digital vernacular really the globalized city and its suburbs? In the sense that it's a series of types in the vernacular sense of the term, an architecture without architects that spreads like a virus digitally in the realm and covers the entire planet? Everyone desires and acknowledges the necessity that this series of types are destroying our climates, our relationship to each other, and the very presence of our bodies. And I consider it as architects we're complicit with a powerful and unique form of deterioration to our civilization. So instead of giving in and acknowledging the impossibility of authorship and accelerating what I think is a powerful trend, we, in our work, at a very small scale, try to organize a form of resistance. One where architecture is not about digital solutionism or branding or even cynical political positions. We believe that architecture has the unique function of constantly constructing the human relationship between the ground and the sky. It is slow, it's old, and we have to make it necessary again. I would like to show a few projects very quickly, which I will not describe very in detail, and to show you how we are approaching the notion of the conversation we're trying to develop together. And the first notion is the notion of cannibalization. Cannibalization is how we approach history. It's how we approach existing types. It's the necessary relationship that we have with what's already there. In a strange way, cannibalization has always been at the heart of the architectural practice. It's about building architecture with architecture. It's building architecture on top of architecture. And the way we approach it, we consider that ingesting territories and their history avoids having a dialectic relationship with them and creates an instant form of familiarity. As an example, this first project is building structures within a 12th century old fabric in the Medina of Fez. We were transformed 4 structures from the 14th, 15th, 16th, and 17th century. And we've decided to only build with the existing materials and existing processes. So not 1 gram of concrete and no mechanization processes at all. We had to use donkeys to move material, and we only used wood and traditional cement to build within these existing structures. Program becomes less important, and it's only the existing traces that we have to build upon that are the heart of what we do. This notion of the program disappearing is very important to us in the sense that we consider that contemporary architecture that only formalize computation of programmatic usage creates buildings that are obsolete before they are finished. Where here, the only element that is important is to fabricate a form that can build on top of an existing structure and that can house many a thing. these structures were here before us, and hopefully they will be here after us. And this relationship to typology as something that is beyond program and form is something that's important to us. Another take on this notion of type is a project for hotel we are doing in Rabat, the capital of Morocco, for the crystal company Baccarat. In this particular case, we use the typology of the courtyard house, not so much as a formal type, but as a way to create the notion of a fabric within a building, to transform a building into a piece of a city, and to recreate ways in which you circulate within a building that at an urban scale. Obviously, the architectural expression can move way beyond the historical and the nostalgic. So whether it's by the erasing of the program or by the erasing of the scale of the type, what interested us in this notion of cannibalization is to take over architecture to make something else out of it or to make something else on it. The second theme I would like to share with you very quickly is this relationship that we're trying to build in our project with the body. And I call this awakening the body, in the sense that we believe very strongly that comfort is at the heart of many of the problems of contemporary architecture. And we try to evacuate this very notion that became almost a right and a necessity. What used to be a question of distribution has become comfort, which then become convenience, which erases the difficulties that the body has to have in experiencing a space. So the two projects that try to embody this very quickly is the project we did for the Moroccan Pavilion at the International Exhibition in Milan, where in this particular case, it's not so much the form or even the material that were reminiscent of the spatial quality of Morocco, but we tried to create a building that will put your body in the physical condition that will trigger memories of how the spaces are used in this place. So we created a building that has no weather barrier, where the smells were important, where we built it entirely in earth, adobe, and wood, and we left enough room for people to read it as many different things. And the experience you have of the building was that if it was 35 degrees outside, then it was 27 inside. But if it rained outside, it was also leaking and raining inside. And the notion that a building doesn't have to seal, doesn't have to enclose, doesn't have to control the climate is something quite important to us. That porosity as a way to reinvent this notion of comfort. Another take on this notion and the relationship with the body is a quick installation we did on the plaza of l'Institut du Monde Arabe. And this installation was a 5-month building that stayed there, which was interesting because we used the type of the tent, but obviously not the traditional form. Actually, it was not even its tensile structure remotely connected to a traditional tent of the desert, but here it's the conjunction of the form of a topographical stretching that became a tent on the one hand, and on the other hand, the use of a millennial-old material, which is a wool that is woven in the south of Morocco, and that is made of camel hair. But in this case, both the form and the way we utilize the material was not just a reinvention, but was a détournement, a way of going around the traditional usage. And that for us is at the epitome of what we're doing. People looked at it in many different ways, whether it's Milan or whether it's here. What was important to us is to use memory as a form of typology, to use memory as a trigger for people to enter into the project. And often with Lina, we consider that we try to not finish our building, and those are two very good examples of unfinished buildings. And it's by not finishing them that we consider we leave room for people to interpret and to experience them. The third theme, and maybe the last one, before I conclude this quick, very, very quick presentation, is our relationship to the territories. We don't build in landscape, but we consider that we make landscape each project is a small part of the world, but each project is a world in and of itself. And I'm going to show two projects that explain this. The first one is a museum we did on the Roman ruin site of Volubilis. The site is extraordinary. It hasn't changed in 2,000 years. You see it the way the Romans used to 2,000 years ago. And the brief we gave ourselves was to not do a building, but to use all the materials that existed around us: stone, concrete, and wood. They're the only three materials we've used in this project, as a way to build a project that has a ruin within it, in the sense that we've built the duration of the disappearance. First, the wood will go away, and then the stone will go away, and then the concrete will go away. This notion that a building isn't a finite form, but holds in itself its own ruin to be. And this notion that the duration is something that is an obsession of ours, that architecture isn't permanent, but it's always a stretching of times. And in a strange way, the more we talk about sustainability, the least the building stay. We're building buildings that are expendables, that we know we're going to tear them down after the economical cycle is over. And we're interested in trying to bring our discipline, which is one of permanence, into this notion of temporality. And maybe on the opposite spectrum of this project of Volubilis is the installation, let's put it this way, the village we constructed for the COP22, which is a 200,000 square meter village we built for a 3 weeks time that housed the international conference for climate change that happened in Marrakesh. And in this particular case, it wasn't so much about building temporary structure, but it was building a temporary landscape where we could invite all the leaders of the world within it. So most of the spaces were actually outside, and we built this kilometer-long canopy that essentially was only protecting a garden to be. And the notion that an architecture has a finite date allows us to create a completely new relationship to the landscape. It's not so much that architecture protects itself and shields itself from nature. It's a way for architecture to invite nature within it as a way to already dissolve itself in time. One last project with this question of climate is a high school we're building the heart of the desert in a very unwelcoming area. And in this particular case, we considered that our role was to build a climate, to use architecture not to protect ourselves, but to actually create a completely onirical, tropical climate, lush, extraordinarily wet and fluid, with its hard landscape. The way we did this is not so much to cover the building, but to use the building as a cover. The project, in a way, is simply a splitting of the program in two plaques, so that all the public space of the high school could exist in between in this shielded landscape. I'm not sure that we've responded correctly to this notion of digital vernacular, and I think it's clear that we're very uneasy with this rhetoric that I consider is a way to escape the actual serious problems that we should be facing. But there are some directions, hopefully, in some of the projects we showed that will show you that we share some of the same concerns as some of the other people on these panels and some other practitioners around the world. And we're definitely part of a generation that poses these questions in a different way than our predecessors. But in a way, all our work could be based on two simple notions. One is that we consider that architecture has to be part of the realm of the real. We cannot be outside the conversation of what needs to happen to build the realities around us. And the second is that we are strongly convinced that we have to build a new modern project of survival, one that would allow us to face not just the challenges of the profession, not just the political challenges around the world, but the fundamental challenges that humans as a species will face in the generation to come, not generations, in the next 25 years, and that will question the very fundamentals of our profession. Thank you.